Good evening, and Gumba Malgan, Gumadani Gedidu, which is good evening. It's good to see you here in Burragum, which is the traditional language of the community that I grew up on the Darling Downs. I am Vicky McDonald, and it's my great privilege to be the State Librarian and CEO here at the State Library of Queensland, and I welcome you to our final Game Changers conversation for 2025 with the co-founders and directors of architectural practice Richards and Spence. Let me begin by acknowledging Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and their continuing connection to land and as custodians of stories for millennia. Here at the State Library of Queensland, we are inspired by this tradition in our work to share and preserve Queensland's memory for future generations. I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to our speakers this evening, Ingrid Richards and Adrian Spence of Richards and Spence. Our facilitator, Dr. Kirsty Volz from QUT, Professor Cameron Newton from QUT, members of the Library Board of Queensland, the Queensland Library Foundation Council, Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame Management Committee, and also Induction Committee. Also welcome representatives from our founding partner, QUT, and also a very warm welcome to our generous partners and sponsors, Pitcher Partners, Channel 7, Morgans, Ray White and Springfield City Group. And of course, we welcome friends and audience who are joining us here at the State Library and also online this evening. We are absolutely thrilled to have Ingrid and Adrian here tonight to discuss the success Richards and Spence has experienced creating iconic buildings and inspiring public spaces. Ingrid Richards has practiced architecture in her hometown of Brisbane for over 20 years. She co-founded Richards and Spence Architects with Adrian Spence in 2008 with the aim of creating vibrant public spaces through private commissions. If you have time after this talk, I encourage you to go across the road to Town Square in Fish Lane to experience Ingrid's passion in placemaking and the beauty of brickwork. Adrian Spence contributes exceptional technical expertise to Richards and Spence, with deep knowledge of building typologies, engineering systems, and market requirements. Brisbane is certainly far richer for Adrian and Ingrid's decision to build their practice here, enhancing the aesthetic and livability of our wonderful city. Game Changers is also delighted to welcome QUT's Dr. Kirsty Volz to facilitate this evening's conversation. Kirsty champions the role of architects in reimagining Australia's housing and placemaking. She collaborates widely to promote design-led solutions that transform how homes are designed, built and procured, fostering more sustainable and connected communities. I'm very excited to hear Kirsty's conversation with Adrian and Ingrid tonight. Game Changers is a Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame initiative made possible through our partnership with QUT. And this evening we'll be using Slido to collect questions from online viewers as well as those on site in our audience tonight. If you go to slido.com and enter the code QBLHOF or simply scan the QR code that appears on the screen throughout the event. So it's on the screen there now, but also during the event we'll pop it up again. And then Kirsty will do her best to get to as many questions as possible. No pressure, Kirsty. The great thing about Slido is you can also vote on your favourite questions and they'll move to the top as well. So Game Changers returns next year with a World Science Festival Brisbane special, and we will be showcasing the work of Lyro Robotics, the Queensland innovators using artificial intelligence and robotics to revolutionise how our food is packed and moved from farm to table. So certainly one not to be missed, and we hope that you will save the 25th of March 2026 in your calendar for that particular event. Finally, I encourage you to visit the Brisbane Portrait Prize finalist exhibition, which is in the SLQ Gallery here on level 2 after tonight's event. So we'll be keeping the gallery open longer this evening. It truly is an extraordinary show of Queensland's creative spirits. So for now, I hope you enjoy the conversation and please welcome our guests. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Vicky, for the warm welcome and introduction. So I'd like to start tonight on behalf of Adrian and Ingrid and myself to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet tonight, the Yuggera and Turrbal people. And I'd like to acknowledge that these lands have always been places for the exchange of culture and knowledge. So the aim of Game Changers brings together inspiring figures from business, technology and creative industries to share their insights with other passionate and curious minds. So that's you and me here tonight. Tonight I'm delighted to introduce Ingrid Richards and Adrian Spence and thank them for joining me to discuss how their work has helped transform Brisbane into a destination city. I'd like to introduce Candice and Julie, who will be our Auslan interpreters tonight, and thank them for their work tonight, and I think we should give them a round of applause. I'd like to welcome everyone watching online through the live stream. Welcome, we wish you were here. I've got some housekeeping to do, so just bear with me for a second. Emergency exits are up the stairs to the back of the auditorium. I think there's lots of architects here tonight. You know this space very, very well, but I've got to do this anyway. And of course, downstairs here. If you have to leave early and it's not an emergency, can you please use the exit at the back of the room and not the front here? Can I remind you, I'm sure they already are, but please turn your phones to silence, but don't put them away, keep them nearby because we want you to use that Slido app so that you can ask questions. I'll prompt you to do that throughout the presentation tonight. There's the QR code up there now. So just a reminder, it's slido.com and the code is QBLHOF, so that is Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame, QBLHOF. That's the code to get into it. Try to include your name in the question so that I can filter my favourite people. I'm joking, but I can acknowledge that it's your question. And if you see a question that you know you wanted to ask, instead of repeating the question, upvote it or like it, and it'll float to the top. Well, shall we get started?
Great.
Let's do this. Okay, so since 2008, Richards Spence have been instrumental in the transformation of precincts, including James Street and Fish Lane. These projects have been and continue to be game changers for Brisbane. What's really interesting about those projects is that they are in the public realm. All of us can access them for free, but they are commissioned and maintained by private developers and private entities. And Catherine Bull wrote an essay for Architecture Australia about this, saying it's a uniquely Brisbane thing that in the inner city precincts, when local government invest in these kind of laneway activations, they're a little hit and miss. But when they're commissioned privately, they're a hit. And so I think your work really clearly establishes the correlation between that good design is good for business. For you, what defines the success of these projects?
Well, I think there's no delusion that the clients are responsible for the success for a large part. I mean, both those projects are legacy projects for both those clients. Like, they're not short-term speculative projects, and they're dedicated custodians of those buildings, and they're constantly maintaining them and like curating the tenants, and yeah, they're very carefully managed. Yeah, and I think, we travel a lot to look at buildings, and sometimes beautiful buildings aren't necessarily successful projects because they don't have that level of management and care.
I think to that point, there's this big conversation that we were having when we first started practice. We were working on some very modest projects, and they had to work commercially. And so part of the conversation is, does design have a commercial benefit? And so I guess we were getting beyond that whole idea where surely everyone understands that design has value, or surely we do. Of course, I feel like we're all, we're preaching to the converted here. And so it's turning that into a conversation about why does it matter, how does it matter? And so we were having conversations basically about, like on some general level, it's as dry as a beautiful place will increase dwell time, and therefore people will stay, and therefore they're more likely to spend money. And that sounds pretty brutal, but that's okay because they're paying for it. And so there has to be some give and take. And so it's that kind of conversation when you're discussing things like why concrete awning is a good idea, about long-term maintenance, and that's to Adrian's point about long-term ownership and what it means to invest in something, and how that might be different than if you're expecting to knock it down in a few years. But even to things like integration of plants, for instance. So all those general tick points that you see from architectural point of view or from a planning point of view, they are all a really good idea, but you have to convince a group of people and ultimately a bank to invest that extra money to make something that will last. And that's, I guess, where we start from.
That's great. And now there's these living projects that exist that are such great examples of exactly that. So talking about early in your practice, you had a really clear direction for your business as to where you wanted to go, which meant kind of filtering and curating the work you were willing to undertake and the work that you wanted to put in the public domain as to how you promoted what you wanted to do. So this discerning process defines your practice, but it also defines the way that you approach projects as well. How do you decide what is worth keeping?
As projects or as site? I mean, when we, many years ago, it was 2007 and we were deciding whether to stay in Brisbane, and we were talking to friends that were living in New York, and we were thinking, okay, that's what we do. We go to a built city and experience it. How fantastic. And it's lucky we didn't, because it was just before GFC and we would have been homeless in a place where you actually die when it's really cold. So it was a good call, but we, as part of that idea to stay here, that decision, we said, okay, well, we're going to work on things in the public realm, things that will make our lives better. And so if we just work on I think everyone tends to be a bit speculative when it comes to property, and they try and imagine what everyone would like, and then that's potentially a disaster. Whereas we said, oh, let's just design things with people that we know, and we can all agree that we would like something and give it a shot. And that's kind of where it sits. And so it's quite personal, but there was certainly the idea that if we're going to spend all this time doing something, we should be able to use it and experience it. So it kept to a kind of public realm.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think, in terms of the work, we kind of talk about as much as necessary, as little as possible, with an idea that we're not kind of building more than you need to, and at the same time not demolishing things that still have currency. And I think, so for new buildings, we try and design them with a flexibility about future tenures as a way of sort of future-proofing them from demolition. And then, I guess also trying to save things that kind of contribute already to the place as a way of sort of maintaining some kind of shared cultural memory and, sort of building an identity for the city, I suppose. So we're not just sort of demolishing things generationally for something bigger.
Yeah, great.
which is historically what we've been doing. I think, I don't know, I think it's like round 5 for me of, you know, Brisbane's coming of age. It's like, wow. And it always seems to come with a suite of demolition, and it's a bizarre way that we approach it. And I think, you know, it's kind of a tragedy, the amount of built form loss that we've experienced, even in our lifetime. And so it's that process of trying to work out if there's a different way. And certainly there's buildings that we've been part of that will definitely be removed at some point because of adjusting heights, but it's trying to step through that process.
Yeah, of having the kind of confidence and identity to hang on, to hold on to those things that are here, the good things that are here. Yeah. So around that idea of place and contributing to place, your work is really definitively place-based. And I guess it's not just about Brisbane, it's about place in terms of the neighbourhood of the local precinct. And so each project kind of thoughtfully relates and gestures back towards its own context. What is the role of precedent in adapting your process for each individual site?
I think, I mean, we're pretty limited in what we, you know, because most of our projects are sort of urban infill, repair, or, and so I guess with that we're kind of, with our best architectural manners, kind of referencing a material or a formal gesture as a way of embedding the building in its place, and making it belong in that site. But you know, I feel like if we're talking about game changing, we should be probably zooming out and looking at, you know, the wider landscape context. You know, I was at a presentation here on Friday where our colleague was advocating to reintroduce, you know, native waterways and overland flow paths, and I think that's really poignant considering the immediacy of our river. And so, you know, that kind of, to do that would take governance and land resumption and all those things that we do for roads and trains, but so we have mechanisms to do it, but yeah, I feel like we need to maybe zoom out on our contextual reference and reference a bigger landscape.
I guess when we were, someone described us as being brick heavy, and we've certainly done a lot of, you know, work where you're like 32 Burnett Lane, that was the old Surveyco restaurant, and St Ignatius School, which is a brick campus building, so it's an obvious choice of materials. And so we've always looked to that, and it was when we first did a project in James Street where everything's tilt up, it all got raised, it was an light industrial precinct, and then there's some kind of 2-story tilt up concrete buildings, like very cheap and speculative showroom type places. And so our job was to infill it and to increase the area, and under no circumstances was it to win an award, which we might come back to because we generally don't enter them, but for that reasons, because I guess it's a developer relationship, so that they know that we're working with them for the outcome of the building, not necessarily for ourselves. And that was a strategy. I don't know if, you know, it's worth considering. But when we looked at 19 James Street, there's nothing around. So that's this one, handy. And the only thing, and so we decided, in the absence of context that we could see, like a local precinct, because it had all been raised, that those trees that were there and had survived some pretty serious droughts was what we'd work with, and that then shaped the form of the building. And so the trees were kept and awnings were placed through, and you'll see holes where the trees could move within the awning structures. We introduced concrete awnings because there's big fig trees, and that's, I mean, arguably the best part of James Street is those mature trees. And this how to build upon that rather than starting something new, but also trying to think of what is a approach to kind of climate relative building that you just clean, you don't resurface, and external circulation because we've got a benign climate. But what was interesting is that in this search for a kind of a language that could be sustained with various tenants that change, so it had to be something that could hold unalike tenants, that we used brick because at the time it was affordable, and everyone hated it. They were so upset. And so the car parking attendants would say to us, you have to render it. Everyone's so upset. It reminds them of their grandmother's house in Kenmore from the 60s. It was interesting because, kind of we're in a position now where if the general population like it, you think, oh God, that's probably, because our job is a little bit different to that, because you can grow to like something. Yeah. And it's how that works, and we picked a material that you could, plants could grow upon, and there's a kind of longevity with the idea that with some maintenance, which is achieved, and with the integration of landscape, you can come back and you get a long-term idea about what very modest, it's retail, can achieve in the precinct. And then what that did is then it set a benchmark for the next building, and they said, well, it has to be at least as good as this. And so the next one was the old library building that is now West Elm, which, and it's funny, if you do an aerial shot, you'll see all these crazy old roofs, and there's, and so it was making that adjustment across the site that then created a precinct, because we weren't trying to make a new building that stood out. We were trying to collectively create a campus of sorts, even though all the buildings are quite different. So we've been very, it's been very fortunate to be able to go through that process across the site. And I guess by the time we got to the Carlisle, which is one of the few where it was completely raised, there was some, there was a tile shop and someone that was a mechanic, that we could add a street in, so the laneway, and build a building that would have been just wildly bizarre without that setting that had been created in the 10 years prior. So,
yeah, wow, that's extraordinary that people would have that reaction to clay brick, because I think that is such a part of that part of Brisbane.
Hate.
I think there was some embarrassment about it being suburban. Like the white brick you get in a suburban condition.
Yeah. And yet you think of the powerhouse, the wool stores, all these amazing clay brick
white
walls,
brick.
but
I think that really kind of
that was the
it was a real
it
was a real tipping point.
Oh well, and I maybe it's that thing too of like when you you get a new car, suddenly you see that car everywhere. Maybe it's that refreshing of that memory around that clay brick. And then there's even those great little houses around in New Farm as well that are like Charlie Fulton houses that are all clay brick.
Yeah.
It's a great material for that region.
It's just part of our cultural cringe that, I think we struggle with as a group. We don't quite know what to do with. And so it's trying to find those pieces that it can be a reminder, and then you can remember things fondly in a way that it might have been embarrassing at the time, and it's a kind of nice thing to be able to reset those memories in how it works. I think what was interesting though is that afterwards, because the precinct it operates very well, it's financially very successful, and it's not a problem now, but it's a thing that we come across where then we get asked to rebuild that, and in somewhere where it's completely inappropriate, and there might be something else that makes way more sense. And so we're working with this scenario where it's almost seen as a product, and it's like, well, that's not what it was. And so trying to reset those boundaries with different groups to make sure that, you know, it's not stuck in a place that has some other experience.
Yeah. So Fisher Lane, as an example, that was an obvious choice to use red brick because there was an existing fabric of red brick in Fisher Lane, so we'd never have used the white brick there. It was
Yeah, great. So I might zoom in for a minute on James Street, because I think that's a really important, I have to say James Street is an important project. The whole precinct is an important project to talk about in your practice. And I want to zoom in on that early project, 19 James Street, which we had up a minute ago. So that was completed in 2012. And I guess, you know, prior to that, there was, of course, the James Street Markets, which was significant, is still significant, by Cox, completed in 2003, which, Ingrid, you were a project architect on that project as well. But through 19 James Street, you established a kind of series of design principles that have since then gone on to kind of influence that precinct ever since. Can you talk about kind of what it means to get the basics right? What are the basics? How do you get them right to kind of have that influence?
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about, it depends what it is. So if you're talking about retail, the basics are car parks and signage. If you're talking about residential, the basics are light, ventilation and acoustics, probably. You know, like, it depends on your setting. And so I think a big part of, if you're working in a retail sphere, is we're setting really strict rules. And so a lot of the aspect of the centre is that there is governance over it, and so there's limitations on I don't know how much you can. You can't put, for instance, anything on the facade, which is different to how it might operate in other ways. And it was interesting when we did the Cornerstone stores down in Tugun, that they wanted to see a James Street Market reproduced facing the highway, and we said, well, that was a council operative, and the DA was not approved on the basis that it was too inward facing, but we were saying, well, it is on the main road. That's just crazy. You're not going to face it. But the other thing is, they said it will never work because the signage, this is it now, the signage isn't bold enough. And I said, well, you have to stop telling people at the Gold Coast that the signage isn't big enough. This is crazy, you know, like, yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense now. And so the absence of it, and it's trying to create rules where everyone can do whatever they want inside the tenancy but not outside, is a big aspect of it. But I think the big thing on all of these projects is that the client group, the development group, has invested in this infrastructure that is very serious. And when you compare it with something like a Westfield shopping centre, we get control. It's like a barcode of facades, and it's presented as a gift. What it is that the tenants are paying for that. So the developer doesn't have to invest in this because it's a different model, and we kind of stay away from shopping centres because that's the world that it's in. But this way, it operates like a real, like a bought one, like a real place. So there's an expectation that the infrastructure won't change, that it is durable, and that these tenants can change. And so, and everyone has good manners, and as a group, that's where you succeed. And so it's the success of the group. And I guess the other thing is that when we were working on these projects, so 19 James Street, you know, the world ran out of money. It was GFC, and instead of hunkering down and fixing the rent, they went, okay, well, let's start having festivals. Let's try and attract people to the precinct in order to support our retailers. And that's what set the tone. And it was a group of clients operating together to come up with a tenant mix that's beautiful. And we'll see the example when that doesn't happen, which is, for instance, the Brisbane Mall, where you end up with like telecommunications stores. So as shop frontage, it's terrible, no one wants to see that, but that's who can pay those rents. And so because there's no collective idea about it, it's multinationals and things that are boring. So you don't get that texture and diversity, but it's also the reason why there isn't a mattress store, for instance, anymore down in James Street, because that's not something that you come and repeat
So that,
business.
I think James Street was pivotal. 19 James Street was a pivot point for the street, because before then it was mattress shops and pot shops, and you pull up in your car outside the mattress shop or the pot shop, and you'd leave in your car, and it was sort of destination bulky goods kind of shopping. And what happened was, I think with the cinema and the markets, is it brought foot traffic, and that brought fashion retail. And so all of a sudden the car park outside the mattress shop became very valuable, net lettable area, retail space, and that drove the 19 James Street. But it's ultimately a very mild renovation, and we did the same thing in Ada Lane opposite the hotel. So the building, that same restaurant, and Bianca, they were, you know, that we just built out the car parks to make more space. And I think that's, you know, and then, you know, ultimately that hotel came after that. But it really marked that point in time when, you know, the street changed to a high street.
I think what's interesting, like, we're talking about very kind of boring subjects about how these processes made, and so there was a series of very kind of like the briefs are very you know, standard, and so it's just this interesting thing. I guess it's the way, just for us, knowing that we weren't going to start with a museum or a library, that being able to touch, you know, say everyday places that people use every day, it has a huge value to our life and to other people's life in this very quiet way. And we think that that's really important. And if that became the opportunity moving forward for communities, like smaller pockets, and to create a bit of structure around it to help it thrive, and to assist with these smaller boroughs. And we think that this is of huge benefit, and it's what we see everywhere internationally, but it seems to be something that we're still learning here. And so there's a kind of, they're very modest projects until, you know, the Carlisle, of course, which is a much bigger endeavour. Yeah.
I mean, what a kind of wonderful asset for a building owner that you could design a retail precinct in a way that, in a tough economic situation, it could be used for festivals or other events. Like that, that's a fantastic approach.
They have a great relationship with council that allows them to shut the streets and to do all these things. So it's yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah, that's great. And I also like that kind of consideration for the public realm. It does, I mean, obviously it's getting the big strokes, but it's also the signage and the concrete awnings and these little kind of human gestures that build that community as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting because this is obviously, it's happened over a series of years, different owners, sites are released in different orders that you would expect. So it's a case-by-case basis. And it's very different to, say, the work that we're doing across the road with Batesmart for ARIA, which is, you know, a big master plan site. So in those instances, you can collect the traffic and open up the streets, whereas this one, it's much more integrated and it's a very different approach, but it's all the same principles, really.
Yeah, great. So having this kind of place-based approach means working with the peculiarities and the eccentricities of each unique site. How do you celebrate the quirk?
Well, I think, yeah, it's leaning in to try and find something, what is of significance or what is weird on the site. So 19 James Street was the trees, like that's kind of nothing, but it articulated the facade. We've just recently handed over 205 North Quay, which was with Batesmart and Rex, and sorry, my God, Hassel and Rex, that was terrible. And I'll go to prison for that. And that site has, so we did a competition with Hassel, and it was a really interesting one because there's an Energex easement that goes off Herschel, and it's huge. It's like 20 metres high, 8 metres wide, 5 metres deep. And so what do you do with that? And so
we had to maintain a volumetric easement over the Energex asset so that they could bring a crane in at any time and remove the equipment from the substation. And so that meant that the first tower floor was 20 metres above ground, and so that's meant that the ground floor is covered outdoor public space.
yeah, so we worked with traffic to get dock access off North Quay, pulled the traffic away, and now we've got this enormous outdoor room that without the Energex easement, I think it would have been hard to swallow for Seabus. I can't imagine going in there and going, this great idea, we're going to have no lettable area on the ground floor. You know, like, that's kind of crazy. But now, and even when it was being built, other commercial developers were saying, okay, when's the glazing going in at ground level? This is insane. They're like, no, it's good, it'll be fine. And they've got a sky lobby, of course. But that's a classic example of like how great it can be if you can lean into it. This is also possible, of course, because we live in Brisbane, and look, yeah, we'll get some hail and we'll get some horizontal rain at some point, but it's pretty benign. Like, you mostly won't die if you're living outside. Like, you'll be okay. And so, you know, there's only so much you really need to do. So I think it gives us more opportunities that we necessarily think we do have. And the colour was a good example of that, because there was a huge conversation as to whether or not the circulation could be external, and we got there in the end using, you know, our closest neighbours, our Asian counterparts, where this is normal, but it was seen again as an embarrassing thing, as a low-end thing, as like using a local context, like a cheap building or a motel, that you would have external circulation. It's like this terrible thing, whereas we're like, oh, yeah, you definitely want to have fresh air and not a stagnant hallway. And so these things, it's about reframing and, you know, reconsidering what these legacy ideas mean when you really think about it.
We're hoping council will legislate that all towers have to have a 20-metre outdoor room underneath them.
Great. Buildings that breathe, right?
Yeah,
I want to continue on this conversation around climate, and you know, it is such a kind of, again, it's something that's very unique to Brisbane, that we have this very benign climate. And I have one more question, which means I want to prompt you all that if you have questions, to send them through to Slido, so that we can get to those next. There's the QR code if you want to do that now. So my last question is, I read in the new Queensland House by Cameron Bruin and Caitlin Butler about your home, La Scala, and it's this excellent quote about the garden being the good room, which is great because that's exactly right. In our climate, the garden is the good room. And I think this is something that carries across all of your work, from being poolside at the Carlisle, from walking through Fish Lane to meet someone for dinner at Southside, or kind of shop hopping in James Street on these footpaths that are so generously shaded by awnings and trees. It's superbly subtropical and it's beautifully Brisbane. What does good design that responds to climate, culture, or why does good design that responds to climate, culture and community matter?
Well, potentially, if you make a building that is loose fit, that allows future change of use, if you design a building that can physically last, and if you design a building that is in some way charming, that there's a level of grace, that people might decide to keep it. And I guess that's a big part of, we were trying to think of a way of describing our practice, and we came up with buildings worth keeping, because that's not necessarily something that's significant. We all think that things will be there forever, but they really aren't. And so you have to go through quite a few steps to do that. And so if we do create collectively buildings worth keeping, then that sets a very different tone moving forward, how we consider our assets, and everything isn't commercialised as a future something site, that we might have a less yield fluidity, and that we might invest more in our built environment. And that is, we talk about building future history rather than, we built those great buildings back in the day and we all really loved them, and it's a shame that there aren't more. So what can we do about that? We can build things worth keeping, and that we all feel a collective attachment to, and shared memories, and you can go back and revisit it, and it's fundamentally the same. The planting's grown, it's been maintained. These are beautiful things, these are romantic ideas, but they're also very valuable. But it's also good from every level, including environmentally, to not keep demolishing and starting again. So I think those decisions are of great cultural significance.
But the condition of living outside is uniquely Brisbane, I think. It's pretty comfy all year round. We had an apartment before we built the house, and we couldn't fit a dining table inside, so we used to sit on the balcony and have all our meals all year round outside. And even in Australia, you can't do that everywhere. And I think that kind of casual nature of living outside is very different and uniquely us, compared to a cold weather climate where you have the doorman and the lobby and the coat check, and there's a sequence of rooms to get inside to a kind of cosy interior, where it's kind of the inverse here. And I think until very recently, I feel like every new venue was called New York style in Brisbane. And I think that does a disservice to New York and Brisbane. But I think now that's dropped away, and we're kind of comfy with being uniquely Brisbane.
Thank Thank you. Look, we've got some great questions already here, so I'm going to hop onto those. I'm going to start with not the most popular one because we did briefly talk about this when we caught up the other day. So this is the question, that is, what would it take for development of laneways and precincts to be successfully executed over time by local government and not require private developers? And we talked about trees.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because should government be, I mean, what are we talking about? A laneway? What are they going to do? Because they don't actually own the assets that create the activation, so they can't actually do it. But what they can do, what's the interesting one, when we were working on Burnett Lane, there were 5 sites, and we did this little brick piece that kind of stitched it all together, and it was literally stitched together. They were rerouted all the power supply to operate a commercial kitchen because there wasn't enough power. Because it's the old suburb, there's not enough power in Burnett Lane to actually support multiple commercial kitchens along the laneway. And there was a proposal to do this kind of demonstrative lighting. We're like, oh, I think we should put it towards the cooktops, because it's actually a bit of a problem here. We can't actually develop it. So sometimes, and I think it's a better approach, is that it is a public-private partnership, but council is given the capacity for these larger pieces of investment, which is things like power, things like trees, and that's often at odds with, for instance, a state government road strategy. So when we see, Coronation Drive, do we remember when all the trees were removed through there for a speculative strategy on how to deal with lane changes on Coro Drive? So it was beautiful, beautiful fig tree lined boulevard, and then these structures went in so you could get... Anyway, so at some point we need to give council the opportunity to spend money on maintenance and these the boring stuff that allow people to do things like have cute little bars and cafes, because that's not going to be run by the government. It is going to be run by small, beautiful little tenants that we all love, and it is different to large public space. These are, but they're not at odds. They can work together, and we need both. And we have seen, for instance, that there's safety issues that are resolved with having tenants, for instance, on a laneway. It's good, it's vibrant, it's beautiful. It's not the only version of public realm, but I think that's council's job, is to assist with the infrastructure to allow these things to happen.
Great.
Oh, I was just going to say, and there's probably having lots of little bars has probably got something to do with liquor licensing, or they're the kind of changes that I think government can affect.
Yeah.
And it's good to remember that before Expo 88, it was illegal to dine outdoors. So that rule was changed in order for Expo 88 to occur as an al fresco dining. And we forget these things. So those rules are very significant. So trying to work out things like that. So an example might be, for instance, tower developments must have an external drying court. Great. Suddenly you can naturally ventilate your building. Suddenly you don't have to put a little A-frame on your balcony that you're trying to entertain with. Some of those rules, if they creep in, might make all the difference.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I think, yeah, it is. It's all those little things, isn't it? A table outside. Yeah. Okay, this is a nice simple one from Gavin. What example of built form loss in Brisbane would you bring back?
There was oh God, I'm being so specific. I mean, we think of places like Cloudland, which we're on the same hill with, and there's the Cloudland apartments, and the great tragedy of that wasn't the building, it was a place to hold dances with in the centre of town. And for all, from everything I understand, the whole thing probably was going to fall down anyway, and it was like terrifying. But the fact that it was privatised with multi-res, with no strategy for replacing that piece, is the trouble. And so that was the Joe Bielke-Peterson time, and it was post-war, and it was cranes on the skyline was a level of optimism. And I think, again, with that idea, when you start afresh, that's a good thing. And so I think there was a, I don't think it was altogether, it wasn't completely cruelly intended, that kind of regime, shall I call it? It's probably, but what it did is that those gathering places, hotels, etc., were lost. The other one, there was a cluster of heritage deco buildings at the bottom of the mall. There's one that's still remaining, that they were sitting there for a very long time, and they were demolished just before, I guess, they hadn't been listed, and it was in case they would get listed. And it's that kind of behaviour. It's just terrible. And so back in the day, I think they still exist. It was the Dean brothers, and their byline was, "All we leave is the memory." And they would come in the middle of the night, and everyone would go, "Oh my God, what happened?" So I think part of that is us understanding that these things are happening, and also trying to work out what other things are worth keeping. And again, I would say mature landscaping and supporting that would make an enormous difference to our city. And it's something that is hard to do and would require huge investment on behalf of council to, for instance, underground power lines. And it would have this enormous effect of the walkability of the city, and then that would have this cascading effect on our capacity to find other ways of getting around other than a car. And so those pieces, again, it's back to allowing council that kind of level of authority and that capacity to maintain what is, you know, trees move and they require repair of footpaths, all that kind of stuff. But those pieces of value are, I mean, it's hard to, it'd be wonderful to imagine, and especially with the Olympics coming up, if we started doing that now, what we could achieve by the time that happens.
Yep. Is there a building you would bring?
Oh, well, no, I was just thinking, I get more upset about some of the things we built, like that spaghetti of road at the start of Coronation Drive, and what that's done to our riverfront.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it wasn't like we didn't know. Everyone had been talking about how poor North Quay was as, like, is there a way of changing North Quay? And then it was extended. It was like to deal with Hale Street. And it's like, how is this happening? So, yeah, some of those larger infrastructure pieces are really missing. It's like that kind of 5% that's public ends up as a piece of art or something, but it's not intrinsic to the outcome. As I discovered when I went to walk my dog this morning and then turned around because I was heading on the, Kingsford Smith Drive, and there's just no shade, and my poor black dog was just going to die. And so it's like, well, that has been unsuccessful as a built realm. So we have to be mindful of these things.
Yep. To continue on with that, I'm going to add to a question. Deborah, you've got a great question. We're going to come to that at the end. Can you talk about the 5 rounds of coming of age of Brisbane and what you mean by that?
Oh.
I often think, you know, there's that kind of joke with the Bruce Highway, be like the Bruce Highway, never stop working on yourself, as and maybe our self-reflective nature as a city is something that is part of our identity, or
yeah. It's humble. Yeah. I don't know. It just keeps coming up. I just remember, being graduating, and it was like, Brisbane's coming of age because something had been built, and then 5 years later, someone says it again, like they've discovered it, and it's always like a bit of a discovery, but then they get a bit bored and
it's always a little bit condescending, like good on you, good for trying.
Yeah.
Yeah, most improved. So I think we've got to get over ourselves in that way and start finding a maturation, which again can't happen if we keep starting from scratch. And I think that's the lesson that we are, as a city, still trying to learn.
Yeah. Great. Coming back to your own projects, I am getting to you, Deborah. You're the last question, I promise. Kat asks, how selective are you in terms of developers and clients you work with, and what attributes and values do you prioritise in accepting clients and projects?
Well, we don't have many clients, and they're repeating clients. But I think what they have in common is that they all maintain ownership of the buildings, and because I think that just their motivation is different if they're keeping the building. And the choices they make. Yeah.
It's a huge difference if someone's completely speculative and they're going to sell it and have no skin in the game. So and so that changes everything about the decision-making process. So even, say, for multi-res, if they have a role, for instance, ARIA has, they've got a business associated with maintaining the buildings and kind of managing them. So that's very different to if you're just going to sell it off the back. And that's what we need, is people with some skin in the game, that it's going to come back and bite you if it's a fail and things start falling off. And that hugely changes the decision. It does make value management interesting, and our buildings kind of look like they've already been shaken. So basically nothing can come off really and it still work. So we kind of operate on this, and that's where that gentle brutalism comes about. It's just trying to find that edge between it, the kind of toughness, and something that doesn't have these additional layers that will ultimately be removed or turned into something kind of bizarre. And so just work on that basis, and it's very kind of cost-driven, and you'll see, like in these examples, the structure is the finish, which is a big thing, and just trying to approach it in that way. Sorry, I've gone off topic.
No,
I'll stop.
That's great. Well, no, I think that's really interesting. I think even the shift in housing market, that move towards more build to rent, shifts the focus away from those speculative housing markets, which might mean that building owners have to really think about the life or whole of life of their building and start making good material choices, good design choices that help sustainability and maintenance.
And I mean, certainly the Carlisle big part of it was it's never going to be refurbished, which is a different attitude. And so saying, okay, what are we building the joinery out of? So it's solid timber, because then you can plane it back and resurface it. It's that kind of basic thing. But it's also the idea that that is a good thing, whereas again, in a centre, like a shopping centre type environment, it's part of their lease agreement that it's replaced. And I can see Claire Cousins in the audience, and I know she's worked on an ASOP back in the day of a very small project for her practice, and that big thing about saying, okay, we're going to spend more money, it's a really good fit out, we're not going to demolish it and build it again in 5 years' time, which is how those centres, work. And so it's a very different attitude to say, we're going to keep something and look after it. And that can apply to anything.
Okay, Deborah, I promised I would come back to your question, and this is my last question for the night. So we're building Brisbane's identity, all of us collectively. Will we recognise Brisbane in 2032, or will we go through an identity crisis before then?
Hard to know what we've got time to do. I mean, these projects take a really long time.
I think we just have to be careful that we don't build things that become redundant immediately after the event.
Yeah, so there's going to be large projects that are done for the event. I mean, what we've seen in cities, so Barcelona are amazing, but the kind of wide spaces, the things that were built for the Olympics were out of proportion with how people live their life. And so we can't redesign the city to suit that. But I think in the way that we were talking about, I think it'll be the quiet pieces that are supporting the larger idea that will be more interesting. And I think it's going to be in the form of things like landscape integration. We've got an issue at the moment, I'm not sure of the stats, but there's a wild number of hotel or short-term accommodation that are required. I don't know who in the audience remembers, but in the Commonwealth Games 82, the people were billeted out because there was not enough accommodation. And whilst that seems a wild proposition, where that might be close. And so we might have to rethink a way, if we can't produce that amount of new building in that amount of time, which seems like a clear and present danger, we might have to rethink about the building stock that we have currently and incentivise quiet adjustment in our backyards. So that'll be a kind of a big conversation. So I think the changes are going to be kind of policy driven that change what we have now and allow things to happen, hopefully.
Great. Well, the character Edna Everidge that Barry Humphries played, that character came about for the 1956 Melbourne Games and the whole story was about her preparing her home to billet athletes in that place. So there's this kind of thing around kind of cultural identity and that thing about being Australian of cringe, but also embracing those things. And I think maybe that's that filtering, that curating, that sorting that we need to do about what do we embrace, what do we hang on to as part of...
Can we put a hand up for the South Korean archery? Oh no, was it the sharpshooting team? They were like so chic. Yeah, that was fantastic.
I think they would love to stay at your place. Right. Yes. Well, I really would like to thank you so much for all of your insights. It's been really wonderful to get to know you both through this process and learn more about the thinking behind your projects. We should do this more often, so please join me in thanking Adrian and Ingrid. And once again, I'd like to thank Candice and Julie, who've done such a great job tonight. I'd now like to welcome to the stage Professor Cameron Newton from QUT to conclude tonight's conversation.
Thank you, Ingrid and Adrian, for sharing an incredible journey with us tonight. Your story is a powerful reminder of how purpose, friendship, and a bold idea can spark real change. Thank you also to Dr. Kirsty Volz for facilitating such an insightful and inspiring conversation. And I, like you, would encourage everybody to be like the Bruce Highway. Let's give a round of applause for all. We heard some really interesting insights tonight, and I particularly liked hearing about vision and direction and your focus on the public realm, making lives better and future-proofing. And this came through in every story that you talked about, everything that you spoke about, that value of future-proofing is clearly there. Saving contributions to the city, creating an identity for the city, and the flexibility so that buildings can continue to have impact, can continue to be reborn and relived as opposed to demolished. I really like the idea of the importance of everyday value and something having the ability to help connect community and to encourage thrive and flourishing in the community. I wouldn't call that standard at all, which was a word that was thrown in there, but it's actually just so important. The importance of place-based and working with trees in some instances, or in other instances working with an energex easement that has had this incredible impact on an outcome. That's such a talent to be able to use that and create value from it. So thank you both for your contribution to Brisbane and the buildings that are worth keeping and your foresight to design with place and future in mind. I am sure we will all be grateful for a very long time. If you'd like to revisit tonight's discussion or share it with others, a recording will be available on the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame website within the next week. On behalf of our founding partners, QUT and the State Library of Queensland, I'd like to extend another special thanks to our sponsors, Picture Partners, Channel 7, Morgans, Ray White and Springfield City Group. Your support makes it possible to continue celebrating Queensland's most impactful business leaders like Richard and Spence. Please join me once more in thanking Ingrid Richards and Adrian Spence and Dr. Kirsty Volz for an unforgettable evening. As we wrap up, feel free to use the exit by the rear or the front doors. Thank you for being a part of tonight's conversation. We look forward to seeing you here for more game changers next year. Please enjoy your evening.